Hello, this is Mrs. Poland for Algebra 2, Lesson 8.05, and we're on the practice graphing section. And so I'd like to go over problems 5 and 6 in this video. So we're given the function -5 sine 4 pi x plus 5, and the first thing we're asked to do is find the amplitude. Well, the amplitude is always the absolute value of the number that appears before the sine or cosine function. And so in this case, it's the absolute value of 5 or 5. The midline is our vertical, represents the line that passes, that's like the baseline. It's the vertical shift. And so it's the number that is added or subtracted to the function. So in this case, it's y equals 5. The range, it goes from the minimum value to the maximum value. Well, the minimum value can be calculated by taking the negative of the amplitude plus the vertical shift. So in our case, it's going to be -5 plus 5 or 0. The maximum value can be found by taking the amplitude plus the vertical shift. So in this case, it's 5 plus 5 or 10. That means the range of the function is 0 to 10. The period of a function is defined as 2 pi over frequency, and the frequency is the value that is the input into the function, not including the actual angle. So our angle is represented by x. So in this case, the period is 4 pi. And so this expression reduces to 1/2. So my period is 1/2. We need to find the spacing because we're going to have to label our x-axis. And to space it, you're going to take the period and you always divide it by 4, like 4 quadrants. So in our case, it's 1/2 divided by 4, which is 1/8. Before we continue, let's label our x-axis. In part B, we know we're going to have to graph 2 cycles. So therefore, now you could go every box, but I know from past experience, I have enough room to go every 2 boxes is equal to 1/8. So we're going to count by 1/8. So 1/8, move 2 boxes over. That's 2/8, which reduces to 1/4. That's 3/8. 4/8, which reduces to 1/2. 5/8. 6/8 reduces to 3/4. 7/8, and 8/8, which is 1. We're going to graph our midline and label. So our midline is y equals 5. Actually, I have to label my y-axis. So this is 5, this is 10, this is -5, this is -10. And let's label our midline before I forget. Okay. And one last piece that we have to do before we can continue is we have to figure out the pattern, those critical points that we're going to graph. So normally sine is 1, 0, -1, 0, 1, or the pattern would be, whoop, that's not true. Sorry, 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. However, in essence, that's the midline, the maximum value, the midline, the minimum value, and back to the midline. But I want you to notice something. I'm going to highlight it. Did you notice the negative in front? If you notice the negative in front, that's a good thing because that tells you that you're going to reflect the function over the x-axis. What does that mean? That means the maximum becomes the minimum and the minimum becomes the maximum. So the pattern that you're going to graph are the critical y values 5, the minimum value of 0, back to the midline, back to the maximum value of 10, back to the midline. I'm going to graph in blue. That's 5. Move over 2 boxes. 0. Move over 2 boxes. The midline of 5. move over 2 boxes, 10, move over 2 boxes, 5, move over 2 boxes, 0, move over 2 boxes, 5, back to the maximum, back to the midline. And a nice smooth curve. It should not look like a V that goes through all the points. And we label y is equal to -5 sine 4 pi x plus 5. So we can see in this graph we have one sine curve that's reflected over the x-axis and two. we see the range is 0 to 10. Second function, number 6. We want the amplitude again. In this case, the absolute value of 7 is 7. The midline, this was A, this was D, is y equals -1, so it's vertically shifted down 1 unit. The range, to get the minimum value, it's the negative of the amplitude, so -7 minus 1, or -8. The maximum value is 7, it's A plus D, so it's 7 plus 1, or, I'm sorry, 7 minus 1, let me write it down here, or 6. So the range of this function is -8 to 6. The period of our function is 2 pi over the frequency, but it looks like the frequency is just 1. So therefore, the period is 2 pi. We need to get the spacing, so we know how to label our x-axis. So our spacing is always the period, so in this case 2 pi over 4, and that reduces to pi over 2. So let's label our x-axis. So every 2 boxes, we know we have to graph 2 cycles, and I know I have enough room. So this is going to be pi over 2. 2 pi over 2 is pi. 3 pi over 2. 4 pi over 2 is 2 pi. 5 pi over 2. 6 pi over 2 is 3 pi. 7 pi over 2. And 8 pi over 2 is 4 pi. On our y-axis, this is 5, this is 10, this is -5, this is -10. Our midline is equal to -1, so we're going to make a horizontal line that goes through y equals -1. And of course, we're going to remember to label. Okay, so what is the pattern for cosine? We don't have to worry about flipping over. So normally, it would be 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. That was the basic one. So we established that the pattern is max, mid, min, mid, max. So in this case, it's going to be, because it's not flipped over, so we don't have to worry about that, 6, -1, -8, -1, and 6. So let's graph 2 cycles of that. So we start off at 6. We start off high, move 2 boxes over to the midline, move down to -8. It's a big curve. Back to the midline, moves 2 spaces over back to the maximum. That's 1. Back to the midline, back down to the, whoa, I missed the midline. I did the x-axis. I have to fix those dots. So here's the midline. I should have done it in a different color so my eyes didn't get distracted. Okay, back to the minimum, midline, and maximum value. And I'm going to graph in blue. Whoop. It's hard to do vertically sometimes. Okay, so here I see two cosine curves. I have 7 units from from the midline to the maximum point, or from the midline to the minimum point. So I know that my range is good, and I know the first one ends at pi and the second one ends, I'm sorry, 2 pi, and the second one ends at pi. I just have to remember to label the equation. I hope this video helps.